What's up, fellow lords of gaming, and welcome back to another episode of Marvel Future Fight. So today we jump in with some patch notes and a tier 4 for Thor. So let's jump right into the well, we'll save that for the end of the video, but let's jump into these patch notes. By the way, before we get into it, hit that like and subscribe button. You guys aren't doing it enough, and there's enough of you watching the video that I should already be at 1,000. Why you don't want to see me hit 1,000 subscribers? Why? Help me out. Anyway, so moving right along. So what do we got? Tonight we've got the rolling patch like normal, where we're basically going to get that update for the summer events. So we've got Iceman and Storm. Iceman is receiving his tier 3 and Storm is receiving her tier 4. A lot of people are pretty disappointed in the fact that we don't have a speed tier 4. Like, they just skipped that out completely. I don't know why they did it. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. We don't have a speed tier 4. It's crazy that we do not have a speed tier 4. We literally went combat, universal, well, we went blast, combat, universal, and they just skipped right over. I got the feeling that this is going to pan out to something with this is better be a really good speed tier 4. I mean, realistically, if you were to take a look at the teams and alignment and you were to say which characters are you realistically going to look at getting a tier 4 from the speed characters, truthfully, this is like one of those things, like, who would you give a T3 to inside here? I mean, a tier 4. Would it be Spider-Man? I mean, would it be Rogue? Would it be Deadpool? I think Deadpool is the biggest moneymaker that you would possibly have there in terms of tier 4. The thing is that when we look at the speed roster on a whole, Netmarble, you have not done a good job in being good stewards of the speed class. That's just the real story, right? So it doesn't surprise me one iota that we skipped over a tier 4 for speed, because who in the speed class would we give a tier 4 to? Like, realistically, I would love feedback in the comment section below. Who besides Spider-Man, besides Deadpool, realistically in this class of speed, would you give a tier 4 to? I mean, I hate to say it like that, but there's not a whole lot here. I mean, you're basically looking at Daredevil getting tier 4 for real. Come on. I mean, there's not a lot inside this class of characters that I think players are like chomping at the bit to basically tier 4. I mean, Deadpool and Spider-Man, that's pretty much all you've got there. That's it. So let's stop the capping and acting like that's a big issue. Now, other than that, we do have the uniforms for Storm and we have the uniforms for Iceman coming. And then, like I said, Iceman is getting his T3, and I thought I did this earlier, but I guess not. So Iceman is getting his T3, and Storm is getting her tier 4. This is, I mean, tier 4. I don't know how I necessarily feel about the fact that we essentially have another blast tier 4 outside of, you know, like I said, I really don't see the point in complaining about it, but it is what it is, right? So that's essentially what you're looking at. But let's take a look at these characters now inside here. It's interesting that that we're getting a tier 3 for Iceman. Loving my little LGBTQ friend over here, Bobby Drake, and tier 4 Storm. I'm not mad about it at all. Now, a lot of players are going to be pretty mad because it's the hot summer deal, which means in order to get this hot summer uniform, you're basically going to have to spend about 20 bucks at a minimum, unless you just pay out the whole $30 in order to get this uniform. So it's basically paywall. I'm not mad about it. Like, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. I'm not mad about it. And the reason why I'm not mad about it is because this is the methodology. Like, for real, we're in a game that's 7 years old. They have to make money somehow. Everything cannot be free. Like, we have to remove these entitled mindsets that everything's free. Now, essentially, we're going to update for the uniform and Storm's uniform. We want to take a look at this real quick inside here. So we basically got the uniform effects inside here that she has. Let's see what she had on her previous one. So these were the uniform effects that she already had, right? And so this is going to be an interesting thing because I want to point this out, right? So we get the 10% increase of energy attack and an increase of chain hit damage inside here, which was on her current uniform. But I want you to pay attention here because her previous uniform effect had YetiCaster Goddess of Judgment is used, applies to self, accumulates 10% of true damage dealt to enemies regardless of defense and dodge rate. So this was where her her accumulation was, right, where it was taken into effect. It was on the uniform effect. That's essentially where it was, right? So now if we pan out back and we look at her skills, however, right, so this is her skill, Goddess of Judgment, right? So now the difference is that now the accumulation effect is going to be directly on her Goddess of Judgment skill, right? So it's directly there. It's just moved from one place to the other. So we have it here. She loses out on some of the effects from her previous Goddess of Judgment, where now we lose the stun, right? We still have we get a boost from 40% ignore defense to 60% ignore defense. Still doesn't have any I don't know why this doesn't, like the ignore defense. I'm dying to see how that's going to work, right? We've got the ignore target's dodge rate, which is also going to increase by 20% to 60%, and the invincible is still there. So the invincibility is still there for the 7 seconds. So now her Goddess of Judgment ultimate skills are just going to look a little bit more complete. That's essentially what we're looking at, right? Weather Goddess is going to remain essentially the same. Like there's no changes here happening to Weather Goddess. It's the 50-50 that you had. But now what does change is her Eye of the Storm skill. So, or passive. So her Eye of the Storm passive now changed to ignore target's dodge rate by 30%, all right? And then she also increases damage to all element damage by 55%. So that's a 20% boost to allies. Personally, I was using Storm a lot inside World Boss Ultimate, lined up with Thor, with Thor and Beta Ray Bill, because she was given that essentially increased 35% element damage. I'm not going to say that this uniform is worth purchasing just to get that increase of that target dodge rate, the ignore target's dodge rate by 30% and the 55%, but that is a hell of a passive to have on this character, because that all element damage by 55%, that's monstrous when you pair her up with other characters, like you know, elemental characters. So I think it's worth it overall. That's just my opinion, but you know, you do what you guys want to do with your money, right? I don't like telling people that. Her one skill essentially remains the same. Not a lot here. Still the 20%, the paralysis on there. Not a whole lot of change here. Her Glacial Spike, 30% shield damage, freeze, silence, still essentially the same skill. Her third ability, Sand Sweep, or Ice Whirlwind, is now called Sand Sweep. I'm trying to see, like, so this one has a bit of differences inside here. So now she has applies to enemies. She's all defense down for 60%, and then she applies to self. She doesn't have the guard as against 6 hits anymore, the guard damage, but she still gets the increase all basic attack, which is still going to be 36 and 30. So there's no change inside here at all. You know, she does remove incapacitation, and she has the 100% chance to immunity to all damage, right? Her fourth skill is going to there's a bit of a buff here, because this one is, well, I guess, is this a buff realistically? She basically gets applies to all enemies a 2-second stun, and then on her fourth skill she gets a 20% recovery of max HP. It reads weird on the forum because if you look at it, it's like negative 20%, but we know that's not what it is. Somebody just put a typo inside there. So she loses out on the defense down here. The defense down goes someplace else, right? So that's essentially what we're looking at, because the defense down, well, I guess it's not even going somewhere else, it's just taken away completely. Then we look at her fifth skill, which is Weather's Wrath, is now called Heaven's Wrath. She's going to decrease all resistance by 50%, and then she applies to self. She gets the invincible for 4 seconds, and that's it. So there's not a whole lot going on her fifth skill, so we'll have to see. Now her tier 4 skill is going to be what people are going to really talk about mostly with Storm, because she already has a damage accumulation on her Goddess of Judgment skill, which is going to be here now. She also, on her Storm, her Striker skill for her tier 4, she's going to accumulate 10% of true damage and chill damage dealt to enemies regardless of the enemy's defense, and she can accumulate up to 10,000. So it's like essentially another acute damage accumulation effect on her. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, because this is really weird, right? It's like she's got it in two places now. She would have had it in two places previous with this previous uniform anyways, but she essentially has it now in two of her skills and not on the uniform. Now, whether or not this uniform was a good uniform for Storm is really hard to say. I definitely liked the uniform. It was striking, but I think the Summer Days uniform will be just as good. But the truth of the matter is that when you look at the uniform, was this a uniform that needed, with the minor adjustments that have been made to the uniform, was this uniform needed to be paywalled behind a summer token type event? I don't know, but we have to see how these skills look when they have a little bit of, how they play out in terms of how the skills look. I can get why people aren't behind this uniform being updated, but I'm interested to see how it's going to look. I really do feel like she's going to get sandbagged anyways in terms of her tier 4 ability, her tier 4 overall, how strong she is. I hope to God that she's stronger than Iron Man, but if you know, you know. That's the bottom line to that deal right there. So then let's take a look at Iceman. So Iceman has been a particularly interesting, character here, because essentially to upgrade this uniform, right, we have to have Iceman, bios. But where can you get the bios for Iceman other than in the shop? So it's a paywalled uniform, right? So we essentially have two paywall uniforms in one update, right? And that's going to be the major complaint. Like, you could have put Iceman directly behind the paywall since he was already there in terms of his uniforms, and that's just been it. Because I've never even leveled up this uniform completely, because Iceman just wasn't really that good, or wasn't going to be good enough for the uniform to be worth leveling up. I did purchase it to take a look at it and stuff, but because I did like the effect, the look of it a bit, but yeah, to be honest, my man wasn't really worth anything either anyway. So let's take a look at what Iceman's got going on. So his previous uniform effect over here, we've got when the freeze skill is used, we get critical damage by 45%. We get increase all basic attacks still by, we get a little bit of an uptick here, it's 40%. And now we also get increased guaranteed critical rate by 35% on his uniform. So be aware that when you're doing that, right, you don't have to account for his critical damage in 45 and his critical rate in 35, because he's getting it from the uniform effect whenever his freeze skill is used, which means that should be the majority of the time, right? So let's take a look at his skills. So first up, we've got his first skill, Frostbite. His active, we still get an increase. So this one completely changed actually, because this was a debuff. Increases all debuffs, increases skill damage. So instead of getting chain hit damage here, he now just gets or the all debuff. He gets an increase in chain hit damage by 15%. The skill damage goes 40 and 35. So that's a pretty decent buff. The increased basic damage increases to 40% as well. So that's pretty nice buff on there. His passive, Cold Shoulder, right, was previously Cold Shoulder. Now it's going to be called Icy Enhancement. So he's going to increase his cold resist by 45%, right? Then he gets a 90% chance to become immune to cold damage. And then he increases cold damage by 35%. Why my man's just not getting a 100% buff ability to become immune or just be immune to cold damage is beyond me. Especially, it's Iceman. This is Omega level mutant. You know what I mean? Like, my man should just have that, right? So let's take a look. So first up, we get Icy Fragmentation. It still is going to deal the 25% chill damage and the stun, so not a whole lot of difference there. His second skill is now going to be called Ice Meteor. Instead of a freeze, he has a bind on that skill. So I don't know, the bind is 3 seconds. The freeze would have been 1 second. So yeah, we'll see. Now we get his third skill, which was Frozen Clones, is now going to be Frozen Spear. So we get the freeze on the enemies for 3 seconds. We get paralysis, which ignores immunity. That's good. He also gets his recovery effect inside here, 20% recovery, and this is where his true damage accumulation is. So this is good because we're getting rid of basically the illusions. Summons are just notably terrible inside Marvel Future Fight. I wish they would find a way to actually make them work, because I think certain characters benefit from summons, but just find a way to make them work. Fix it in that Marvel. So then we get his fourth skill, which was Icicle Rain, is now called Unmelting Ice. Still keeps the stun, but we get 3 seconds on that. Still keeps the freeze. The freeze goes from being 0.5 seconds to 3 seconds, so big significance there. And then he loses out on the cold resistance decrease, and the paralysis immunity, but he loses a lot on this skill. We gain, excuse me, I'm lying to you guys. What the hell am I talking about? He gains the decrease of cold resistance, so it's only up to 30, but so it's not quite a lot. He also gets paralysis, which ignores immunity. He gets super armor, increase all basic defenses by 20%. So that's kind of like a nerf a little bit, because we can see here he increased all basic attacks and basic defenses by 25%, hit the critical rate for 25%, and had the removes incapacitation. Well, essentially what you're seeing is that critical rate is being moved somewhere else in certain uniform effects, so we don't get it on this skill anymore, right? All right, so number 5, his 5th skill, Frigid Giant, is what it's still called. So instead of dealing 40% chill damage every 1 second, he is going to deal 30%. So a bit of a nerf there as well. Gets a stun. The stun is reduced from 3 seconds to 1 second. The freeze is still the same at 3 seconds. Still has the invincible gets a nerf because it goes from 6 seconds to 3 seconds. And then he gets an increase all basic attack, basic defense by 35, 1, and 35. So essentially what you see is a move around of skills. We get the frenzy buff from his 4th skill now on his 5th skill. That's essentially what you're looking at. I don't know how I necessarily feel about that, right? On his ultimate skill, which is called let's pull this up for you guys to see. This is his ultimate skill. He's just dashing around, very reminiscent of the X-Men. So he gets deals 30% chill damage for 1 second, the freeze, silence, cold resistance for 60, and then he gets an 80% chance to penetrate with an invincible for 8 seconds and an increased basic damage by 100%. That's on his tier 3 skill. So we'll have to see how those skills play out and how they look. Personally, I'm a little disappointed in this update from a number of angles. I didn't feel like Thor was necessarily all the powerhouse that he should have been, could have been, and would have been. And I definitely said Jane Foster was going to be the shiner inside this, and I think that came true. She was. Valkyrie is a better playable character, but you know, it is what it is. So up next we've got the artifacts, right? So we got the region of Mars, which is Storm, and we got absolute 0 for Iceman, right? So essentially complete the weather control level 4 activation. She gets increased damage of all elements by 20%. That applies to self, and Iceman applies to self, increases cold damage by 30% of cold resist, and increase all resistance by 20%. So not a whole lot there, right? So it is what it is. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of hype around this update. I think there's going to be a lot more disappointment than more than anything in here. So that's just that's my feeling about it. You know, you got basically two paywalled uniforms at this point inside the game for this summer update. I'm not surprised by it. You know, it's Netmarble, where I think they should have did a little bit better here. Now, what I want to do to finish out the video here is I want to talk about Thor and tier 4ing Thor. So I basically did everything that I needed to do to get Thor to tier 4. He is going to be my very first tier 4 character. I want to make sure that people understand this. When I put up my Thor video previously, I said to you guys, not a whole lot of reason for you to tier 4 characters, because the truth of the matter is there's no content in the game that requires you using tier 4 characters. Essentially, you can get through Giant Boss Raid Dormammu, you can get through World Boss Ultimates without having tier 4 characters at all. So I really would, if I could advise you guys to pick and choose which characters you actually want to tier 4, because it's going to be important. Like I said, I knew that Thor wasn't going to get the power upgrade that, you know, you would essentially want him to be able to have, because it just wasn't going to be, you know what I mean? Like, it's something that they tend to do, and they will try to milk him for as much as possible because he is a popular character. I think they said that he was their 5th most popular character. So when you commit to these tier 4s, make sure that you're doing it because it's a love of character inside this point, because the investment to get there is a lot of time and a lot of effort at this point. So That's what it is. I'm going to make a side video to look at how Thor works as tier 4 inside some of the content now that I'll have him at tier 4. But I am happy to tier 4 Thor because he's one of my favorite characters. I use him in a lot of game modes because he's my favorite character. I still use him in World Boss Ultimate, World Boss Legend, even though he's not probably one of the better characters for there. I use him inside Squad. I use him inside ABX. I use him inside just about every mode that I can because he is one of my favorite characters to play. Am I a fan of this uniform? Nah, not really. Am I a fan of the fact that Thor is not as powerful at tier 4 as I think? Not really, but it is what it is. So make sure that when you do this, that you actually do it. Like for me, Iron Man feels like he plays a lot better than Thor. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that, you know, you should tier 4 Moon Knight over Thor, but you know, it's a consideration for you. Combat characters are what they are, but pretty much the game's meta is blasting universals. That's what it is. So let's see what we get for Thor and tier 4 and Thor. It is a very expensive venture. 10 of these freaking giant the Book of Ashanti universals, 1,000 of the life seeds. That doesn't include the life seeds that you need to level up each of your gears. 800 of the carbonadiums from World Boss Legend, and the most expensive thing, which is gate kept, is the Soul of the Faultines, because you can only collect like 150 of these a day. So think about that, because it's 1,500 of them, just so that way you can make that tier 4 advancement. And you still need these Souls of the Faultines for individual gear level ups as well, which is ridiculous, all to unlock a striker skill. So think about that. The gold is, you know, here nor there. Summon the Bifrost. Very lackluster. Very lackluster. Oh, very lackluster. So there you go. That's tier 4 in Thor. So we get his new striker skill. Basically, it increases the active buff effect by 10% and then increases all element damage by 50%. So hopefully what the striker skill will do is buff up Thor a lot more than what he currently is in terms of his damage. If you paired him up with somebody like Beta Ray Bill, who's already increasing his lightning damage, and then you also buffed him up even more with somebody like Storm, who's giving him 55% element damage from her new uniform, that should maximize the character overall. But this was the problem that I had. I didn't want to see Thor having to rely on others in order to buff him. That's not who the character is. The character is strong enough to exist as a powerhouse on his own, and he shouldn't need these. But I'll make some follow-up videos for these, so that way you guys get the full 1-1 on Thor at tier 4 if you haven't already, from some of your other favorite YouTubers. And until next time, guys, peace.